Uh, we're excited to have Jack Payne with us this afternoon. Give us a presentation. Briefly, I want to mention that our foundation is the sister organization for NREEF. We're a charitable foundation, so we can accept donations and provide a tax-deductible receipt, unlike NREEF, which is a nonprofit, but it's not a charity. We welcome having Jack here today. Let me give you a little brief on Jack Payne. I'm trying to get your sketch up here. Jack has his MS in aquatic ecology and a doctorate in wildlife ecology from Utah State University. He's a member of the Farm Foundation Roundtable and Senior Advisory Board member for Solutions from the Land and a board member of the Bonefish and Tarpon Trust. Jack had a long career with the Ducks Unlimited as their National Director of Conservation. And while there, he had a number of successes, including development of a private lands program with agriculture and a national conservation easement program and expansion into Mexico and South and Central America. He then moved into academia, serving at Texas A&M University with the Fisheries and Wildlife Department and Penn State School of Forest Resources. Eventually, he moved on to administration and has recently retired as a Senior Vice President for Agriculture and Natural Resources at the University of Florida and Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. So welcome, Jack.
Thank you.
Looking forward to your topic today, and please have the floor.
Well, thanks very much. And thank you so much for the invitation. I was so happy to see so many of my Florida colleagues involved as trustees. I had a chance to visit with them, and I always told everybody I worked with that it's so important to be involved in your professional organizations, and it's good to see so much activity by UF. I also want to just say a brief thing about my old friend Chuck Gay, who when I went to Utah State to head up the Extension Service, Chuck and I were joined at the hip, and you know, the people in those jobs are only successful by who they surround themselves with, and Chuck is the ultimate extension professional, and then when he retired he became a carrot delegate. So I was really happy to get the phone call from Chuck to ask me to do this. So thank you all for your interest. The title I gave, Speaking Truth to Power in Today's Land-Grant University. I'm very upset about what's happening with public research universities, especially. It's all started, in my opinion, at least my own experience in Florida, and I want to talk about that. Some of the things that haven't been made public about even concerning my own time and why I left. And I don't have any magic bullets, but it's scaring me because it's spreading. There's the Ohio State Legislature was looking at things that would harm the Ohio State University. Wisconsin has had legislation. Some states are looking at getting rid of tenure, but let me give you some specifics. So I retired 2 years ago, and then they asked me to come back and teach a grad course. It was I was really nervous when they asked me to do this because, you know, with 30 years I was an administrator. And first of all, let me just give you a little bit of my background and why I'm so concerned about land grants. The land grant was made for people like me. I'm third generation in the United States. Both sides of my family immigrated from Ireland. They grew potatoes in Massachusetts. And I was the first in 3 generations to go to college. And I went to land grants. And my whole career has been in land grants. So I have experienced how important they are to the success of our country. and how they built this country. And one of the highlights of my career was when we had the 150th anniversary of the Land Grant Act on the Washington Mall. I was up there with 3 cabinet members. I was asked to give a 10-minute explanation of why the Land Grant University is so important to the success of our country. So what's happening today really breaks my heart. And we have to fight back. And I realize there may be people in this call that don't agree with me, and that's fine. But I wanted to tell you from my own experience what I saw and what I think is happening. So I'll talk about my personal experience in a minute, but after I retired, they asked me to come back to teach last year. It was a graduate course. It was Natural Resources Administration and Policy. They're all PhD students, a couple of master students. And I was petrified because although I've given a lot of guest lectures over the years I've been an administrator, it's been 30 years since I was in charge of a class, but I loved it. It was fantastic. If I was president, I would make all my vice presidents and deans teach a class because that's what it's about. So anyway, I mentioned that because when COVID came back, this is September a year ago when I was starting this class, and the year before everybody was online, all the faculty at UF said, well, we want to be online again. And Joe Glover, the provost, said yes. And of course, I was one of the teachers, so I was getting all this email. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, an email came from Ken Fox, the president, said there'll be no online classes, there'll be no mask mandates, there's no vaccine mandates. And the Gainesville Sun did an investigation, a local newspaper, and found out there was collusion among Governor DeSantis and Maury Hosseini, the chair of the Board of Trustees, and Ken Fox, pushing DeSantis's anti-mask, anti-vaccine mandate. So that was number one. So that was very concerning. And I was not at this meeting. It was a dean's meeting. It's a secondhand information. But the deans told me that right after that happened, one of the deans said to Fox, you need to stand up to Governor DeSantis on this anti-mask, anti-vaccine mandate. And he said, I'm not going to do that because if I do that, I'll be fired. The university budget will be cut and they will hire somebody in my place that you will like even less. Well, I thought about that, and nobody wants to see anybody lose their job, but is his job more important than somebody who may have died or might have died from an anti-vaccine, anti-mask mandate? So that was the beginning of me seeing, that wasn't the beginning, but I'll talk about some more of the failure of the leadership to stand up to political pressure. Because in my mind, these land grant universities and all public research universities especially do 2 things. I mean, we do a lot of things, but 2 main things. We discover truth through evidence-based research that our wonderful extension service takes out to the public. And we educate. There are the 2 things. And if you let politics interfere with that mission, then who do we believe? Now, I'm not naive enough to think that there won't ever be politics. Of course, there will be. The governor appoints the board of trustees. But that part of a university's mission should be sacrosanct and should not ever be subject to politics. And if you're the leader, if you're the president, and if you let that happen, then you have betrayed the trust of what it means to be a leader of a public research university. So the anti-mask, anti-vaccine mandate was number one. Then we appointed a guy by the name of Joseph Latipo to be the state health director and gave him tenure overnight in the College of Medicine. He came from California, and he fit in with the governor's mandate of he didn't believe in vaccines, he didn't believe in masks. And, you know, I'm living this here in Gainesville because my personal position is part of the UF medical faculty, a woman whose grandfather founded the medical school. And, you know, it's really upsetting when you be my age to go to a woman that looks like a college student or your doctor, but she's fantastic. And I mean, she would explain to me how incensed the medical faculty was over this. They had petitions and everything, but nothing could be done. You know, and it really was a blight on everybody that worked hard for tenure at that university to give this guy tenure. And he's still there. He's still there. And there's been editorials written about how he used bad data or ignored data in not allowing masks. That was number 2. Number 3 was the governor passed anti-CRT legislation that was against the law to teach critical race theory. Now, you know, I've read a lot about critical race theory, and I have another name for it. It's called Actual American History. Okay. And so three UF faculty were asked to testify against this. There's a lawsuit. And that's what faculty do. Faculty are experts in a specific area. So all over the world, from all over universities, faculty are asked to be expert witnesses because they are experts in that specific area. And the president told the three faculty they could not testify because they were testifying against the state, and they are the state. They are state employees. So that was number three. And there is a lawsuit by the faculty, two from the Department of Political Science and the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and one from the law school. And they won the lawsuit. They won the lawsuit. So back up a year before that, when I retired. So I was asked to represent the land-grant universities in trying to stop Trump from moving NIFA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, to Kansas City. Now, I didn't do this alone. I was asked because I was just recently the chair of the policy board chair for the Board on Agriculture for APLU. And once you step down from that, there's nothing else. And they asked Gail Buchanan, who was over NIFA undersecretary during the Bush administration, and Kathy Wutecki, who was over NIFA as undersecretary during the Obama administration. Two people whom I know well. And the three of us went to Washington about 7 or 8 times. And at the time, this is 2019, that House had just switched from Republican to Democrat, but the Senate was still Republican. And it was the Senate that approves the move to Kansas City. And if you do a deep dive, you find out that Trump was upset because of the climate change research being done. And this is his way of punishing them. And Sonny Perdue, the Secretary of Agriculture, was leading this fight. So we met with everybody. And Senator Collins from Maine, as a Republican senator, agreed that she would help us if we got another Republican senator to stand with her. We worked hard on Rubio in Florida, so many, but nobody wanted to upset Trump. So, of course, the House was against it, and we met with a lot of Democratic senators who were in the minority at the time. And I was asked to testify before the House Ag Committee, where our local congressman at the time, he's now retired, Ted Yoho, was on the committee. Did not make him happy that I was there testifying against Trump trying to move NIFA to Kansas City. So when we saw the three of us, we were losing, our last ditch effort, we put together a letter and sent it to all land-grant university presidents in the country, asking them to work with their congressional delegation, many of their senators, to stop this. And we know at least 30, I think, let us know that they did that and thanked us for trying to stop this nonsense. So being senior vice president, I had a one-on-one meeting with the president every week, whom I reported to, Ken Fox. A guy by the name of Bernie Matchin hired me, worked for him for 5 years. He retired. I was on Ken Fox's search committee. And I give him the letter. I kept him up, told him what I was doing all the time. I was in Washington and all. And he said, Jack, I'm not going to sign that. I said, Kent, you have to sign it. I'm way out in front leading this battle. This is where our money comes from. Only 27% of the NIFA scientists have agreed to move. It's going to really hurt the organization. It's going to hurt our research dollars, yada, yada, yada. Quote, Jack, president should not get involved at this level. I'm not signing this letter. So he said to me, this is all like private. Nobody knew this. This is why I left. He said to me, you have to understand that I'm between a rock and a hard spot because I have two politicians in Florida who have great influence over the university. Senator Scott, who used to be the governor, and Governor DeSantis. And Maury, he's the chairman of the board of trustees, was a Republican operative, billionaire developer. Maury is really good friends with Scott because they worked closely together and he was governor. But he did not support DeSantis when he first ran. So he's playing catch up, Jack, and he's doing really well. I said, well, that's good. Well, I'm glad you agree because that's why I don't need people like you being quoted in the national press about Trump moving NIFA to Kansas City. And what he was referring to was this guy from the Washington Post named Ben Garino, a reporter, would interview the three of us, Gail, Kathy, and me, after our trips to DC. really nice articles. And the last article we lost, there was a quote from me. It said, "This is the brain drain we all feared." Jack Payne, University of Florida. That was a pull quote that went nationwide. So here's my boss bringing this up to me, and he said, "You've upset Congressman Yoho. You've upset Chairman Hosseini. You've upset Governor DeSantis," letting me know my stock was really low. Trying to do the right thing, and you know, we would have our APLU meetings, and all the deans and vice presidents in ag, we'd all get together and we go, "Yeah, Jack, thank you." They gave me a standing ovation, and my successor Scott had a NIFA at the time, and we got up, we challenged him, and of course, in Scott's favor, when they accepted the appointment, he didn't know that Sonny Perdue was going to try to move NIFA to Kansas City. There wasn't much he could do about it. So I walked out of his office, and I don't want anybody to think I was making a big sacrifice here, because I was 74 years old. You know, past the time most people retire, but I love my job. I love the people with whom I work. I was going to work another year or two. I walked out of his office. I called my wife. I told her what happened. I said, "I cannot work for this guy anymore. I'm going to get back to my office. I'm going to send an email out to all the IFAS faculty and staff and tell them I'm going to retire at the end of the year. Are you okay with that? Because once I send it out, I can't pull it back." And she said, "You've made me the happiest woman on earth." So that's why I left, because I saw what was happening, and there's nothing, you know, I could do about it. So since then, I thought a lot about, I mean, I've had faculty, not a lot of faculty, but IFAS faculty asked me to be a reference on their jobs trying to get out of UF because of what's happening. And recently, the governor appointed 2 politicians, no qualifications at all, except they were elected in the Florida legislature to be presidents of 2 Florida colleges, public colleges. And then we, UF, selected a politician to be our president, Ben Sass. Now, you know, some people say, "Oh, Ben Sass, you know, he's bright, he's articulate, he's, you know, whatever." Ben Sass voted against the confirmation of Ketanji Brown Jackson for the Supreme Court. One of the most qualified jurists in my lifetime, you know, and this guy's going to do something about diversity and critical race theory. And I mean, it's just, and how did he become a candidate? There was no, you know, Chuck's on this call. Utah State University, where I did my graduate work, and 20 years later went back as a vice president. Small university compared to Florida. Just hired a new president. You need to go look at her qualifications. It will blow you away. She is an outstanding candidate. They had an open search. They had 3 finalists on campus. The public, the students, the faculty, everybody was involved. I couldn't believe the quality of this person, who has degrees from Berkeley and the Ivy League, and works with NASA. And, you know, that's the kind of president the faculty, staff, and students at UF deserve. Not a secret ballot by the Board of Trustees that says we have a sole candidate, a US Senator. That doesn't make him the best person. So it's what's upsetting me is the control of these institutions that discover truth for the people of the world, and trying to impose an ideology that is not arrived at scientifically. And I'm worrying about it, and I wanted to, and I'm sure many of you are too, and you see it in your own states, but I think we need to talk about it. We need to talk about it publicly. And the faculty around the country, they're the ones that are standing up because, you know, they're tenured and they have courage. And the new college, which is a small liberal arts college in Florida, which DeSantis had fired the president and hired one of his cronies and appointed his own board of trustees, they voted did a vote of no confidence, I mean, at least they're standing up. The students stand up, the students and the faculty. So people say, what about all the deans, Jack? You know, I hired the 4 deans at IFAS, great people. I love them dearly. You know, administrators, as you all know, many of us, as I did, have an academic appointment because we got tenure someplace. So if we get fired as an administrator, we go back to the faculty. And some like Charlie Lane, a good friend of mine who was the COO at UF, just got fired, you know, has no place to go because he wasn't an academic. But the administrators are in a tough place because, and I can appreciate that, you know, we all have kids in school, we have mortgages to pay, we need a job, we have other people depending on us. So it's so difficult to stand up to this power that is changing, in my opinion, the purpose of a university. I don't hold that same regard with the president. That person should be willing. You know, I say to this day, if Kent Fox, who has since stepped down, stood up to Maury Hosseini and Governor DeSantis, yeah, he probably would have been fired, but he'd be a national hero. He'd be a national hero that could probably write a ticket some other place, but that didn't happen. And I don't see it happening in other places. I did see a president of, I want to say Loyola or someplace, just wrote a scathing editorial on what's happening in Florida. I put it on my Facebook page. So there are people that are willing to speak up, but it's so difficult to do that. So then I tried to think, well, how can faculty get more? I mean, faculty control the curriculum until the governor says you can't teach it. How can we get more power in their hands? And, you know, the power is really in the Board of Trustees who are appointed by the governor. And I looked at that, and, you know, there's 4 states that elect their trustees. Michigan elects the Board of Trustees for the University of Michigan, the people of the state, University of Michigan, Michigan State, and Wayne State. The other smaller universities and 2-year colleges are appointed by the governor like they are. But Michigan, Colorado, Nebraska, and Nevada elect, the people elect the Board of Trustees. And I'm not saying there will never be any problems with that because, you know, we can elect the wrong person, but at least you can look at who you're voting for and see if they're qualified to lead a university and support the mission of a public research university. That's not happening in Florida. So you get a governor that wants to take his ideology and he hires people that agree with him, and they're forcing presidents and administrators to follow through. And I think it's going to be extremely damaging for the scientific integrity of the university. You know, I've had administrators and politicians say to me, there's no racism in our country, Jack. Now, you know, I'm a white guy. I worked an 8-hour day job when I was an undergraduate. I grew up in a plumbing truck. I worked hard, but I think I would have had to work a lot harder if I didn't have white privilege. I acknowledge it. I know what happens. I've had one of the beautiful things about working in a university, especially at the level that I had the privilege, 2 as a faculty and 3 as a vice president, is I had involved in big international programs. And when you work and you get to know personally people of different color, different ethnicity, different religion, different countries, you realize that people are people are people. We all have the same hopes, desires, loves, worries about our families, our careers, our children. And when you get to that point, you really have a hard time understanding how, you know, things like the Holocaust ever happened, you know, even though, you know, intellectually you can get there, but it's really hard to understand that. And, you know, I hired, and I hope he's not embarrassed by me saying this, but, you know, the dean of research at IFAS, great guy. I hired him 3 times. He was a faculty. He was a sugarcane agronomist when I at a research station in the Everglades when I took the job. He competed for director of the station a couple years later. national search. I hired him for that. A few years after that, he competed for a national search for chair of the agronomy department. I hired him for that. Then he competed nationally as for dean of research. I hired him for that. So I like the guy. I think he has a lot of qualifications. He married a black woman when he was in the Peace Corps from Liberia. They have children of color. His son. Now, this is a successful family. Rob is a great scientist. He's a good administrator. His son was stopped dozens of times by the police when he got his driver's license because he drove a nice car. He was a black kid. So don't tell me, and he never got a ticket, but don't tell me, and I'm sure you all have examples that, there's no racism in this country. And to have the power of government to come in and say that it's illegal for faculty to teach about that is criminal in my mind. And I know I spoke a lot, and again, this is Jack's opinion. I appreciate you letting me sound off, and I know that it's 1:30, but I'll turn this back to you, and I'll be glad to respond to anything.
Thank you very much for that, Jack. And I wouldn't mind if we would take a question or two if someone has a question for Jack.
Well, I do, and I don't know if it's as much of a question as a comment from, being boots on the ground, sort of thinking about the same things, Jack, as you were talking about. And it reminds me of the early days of Rick Scott and, a lot of us working in the counties with our counties on climate change issues that we knew were important to the counties, and just, sort of disregarding what the politics at the top is happening. And so I guess I can probably assure you that's probably going to happen again. We're just going to ignore it and continue on what we're doing, what's right, and what needs to be done.
Well, we had a conversation before the meeting started. I was just thrilled to hear about the climate change work that you were doing and how important it is. When DeSantis was governor, Tom Fraser was head of the Natural Resource School under IFAS. Tom is a marine ecologist, and he asked me to be a reference when he was up for the dean of the College of Marine Science at University of South Florida, which is the only college in the state. And before he did that, for the year before he became a candidate, I worked out a deal with the governor's office because Tom was the first chief scientist, if you remember, that DeSantis, he created that position and they took him away from us. And Tom wanted to do it, and I was glad to support him in that. He told me that he gave a press conference on climate change that got in the paper, and chief of staff from DeSantis came to see him and said, the governor says, quote, "I don't want to see shit like that again in the newspaper." So this is, and I want to say, the Extension Service has one of the biggest challenges. It's one thing to not stand up for research faculty, but the Extension Service, and I started out as an Extension wildlife specialist. I had the privilege of running 2 Extension services in Iowa and Utah. You're dealing with the local population that goes both ways, and you have tremendous pressure on you. But what's so important, what I always tell people, you have to stand up for truth. And truth is what the science tells us. And that's really, as you all know, why we create the Extension Service, to take the research that we were discovering in these new universities out to the people. So, you got to be true to the science. And, I found 2 quotes I wanted to share with you near the end of this talk, and it gets back to what you were just saying. And the first one is, there is a price to pay for speaking the truth. We all know that. There's a price to pay for speaking the truth. There is a bigger price for living a lie. That's from Cornel West, who's an academic and author. And my favorite quote that I use all the time is from Colson Whitehead, who wrote The Underground Railroad. He won the National Book Award for that. His quote is, "Be kind to everybody, make art, and fight the power." And that's what all you need to do in this times we live in, being a public research university faculty member, is fight the power stand up for truth. Be kind to everybody. I told these kids when I was teaching the Natural Resource Administration, they asked me what I thought as a longtime administrator, what the important characteristic was of being a good administrator. I said 3 qualities. Number 1, be kind. Number 2, be kind. Number 3, be kind. Kindness, standing up for truth. I think, as the old saying goes, the truth will set you free. You'll have a great career, despite who's trying to run the state and trying to run the university. So thank you again so much for the opportunity to visit with you.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Excuse me, Jack. And if you don't mind, perhaps